Good afternoon. My name is Jolene, and for those who don't know me, I am the archive specialist at the Proctor Library at Flagler College. Thank you for joining us today for our discussion on the Resilience Project. Today, you will be hearing from some of the cultural heritage professionals who have been collaborating since last summer in order to bring into light the many contributions of the African American community in St. Augustine. They will be talking about how their institutions have been developing programs around the Black experiences found within their collections. We will be including virtual lectures, tours, exhibits, digital humanities projects, theme site tours, and other educational resources. After all the presentations are complete, we will have time for questions, so feel free to ask your questions throughout the event in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. First up is Casey Wooster and Laura Douglas Marion from the Governor's House Library. They have been essential in organizing this project, and they will be able to talk more on how this project came together and how the Governor's House Library is contributing.
Thank you, Jolene, for that introduction. I am Laura Marion. I'm the collections coordinator at Governor's House Library. For those of you who have never visited us, we're located on the second floor of Governor's House Cultural Center and Museum, which is right across the street from Flagler College. Our library focuses on the historic preservation of St. Augustine and the changes of its built environment in the 20th century. So we also are the facilitators of the St. Augustine Archival Society, which is the group that many of the panelists today are a member of. Before in the pre-COVID times, we would meet monthly at different sites and tour and talk about the problems that we all face and different solutions to working in small archives in St. Augustine. And so the Resilience Project was born out of the Archives Club last summer after the murder of George Floyd and many of the Black Lives Matter movements getting started. We wanted to find a way that we could be the best allies possible for our local African American community, and the ways that we as cultural heritage professionals can work together to highlight some of the underrepresented stories of St. Augustine. So I will pass it over to the collections assistant, Casey Wooster, now to talk more about what we are doing at Governor's House.
Thanks, Laura. My name is Casey Wooster, and I'm the collections assistant at Governor's House Library. Like Laura said, we have been working with our Archives Club plus more members of our community to put together this community grassroots, I hate using that phrase, it's cliche, but a grassroots effort to better highlight these 450 plus years of stories and experiences and collection items that we have spread throughout our city. For we all have a story, we all have collections, and we all have a lot to bring to the table. And as part of this effort, we've been able to take a deeper dive, reflect on our own collections, because I know here at Governor's House, we've been looking back through our collections. We thought we understood them. We thought we knew the story, but looking back at photos, we can see laborers working on the houses, and you're like, what's their story? Like, who are they? What were their dreams? What did they love being laborers, or maybe they wanted to be a dentist? I don't know. But just taking a different look at what we have, but also highlighting the things we do know about. So that's what the whole point of this has been, but also what we've been doing professionally at Governor's House Library. Do you agree, Laura?
Yes, definitely, I do. And we are excited to continue diving into our own collections to learn more about all of the different contributors to the work that the Historic St. Augustine Preservation did, and to find out more about what those people's involvement was and how they felt about the projects that were happening in the 50s and 60s in St. Augustine. So stay tuned for more.
Oh, yes. Oh, right. Yeah, so it has been wonderful working with our community, and it's let us learn so much more. Laura and I both are new to St. Augustine, newish. Laura's been here 3+ years. I've been here over a year. So this has been wonderful experience to get to know each other's collections, to get to know more stories and the history. Like, even though we're history practitioners, we don't know everything. So this has been a wonderful learning experience, and getting to grow together has been a wonderful experience. Laura, what's something you've learned?
In working on the Resilience Project or through Archives Club?
Either.
I have, in my 4 years working in St. Augustine, have really enjoyed getting to know the members of the Archives Club on a professional and personal level, and getting to brainstorm different ideas to solve problems that we have, to work together, you know, after any natural disasters that we've had, to learn more about how to prevent those together has been great. And working collaboratively on projects and getting new perspectives has been one of my favorite things about working with this group. And the Resilience Project is really the culmination of a lot of smaller collaborative projects that we've done, but it's so heartwarming and encouraging to see so many of the organizations that are part of Archives Club involved in this project, and working together to make St. Augustine a better and more inclusive and welcoming place for all of us to live and work.
Oh, that's awesome. I was going to say the same thing. I would probably cover what I was going to say, what I've enjoyed or learned thus far, this process, and then it has been that, oh, we got our 1-minute warning. But I agree with you. Getting to see all these tiny bits and pieces, like everyone's efforts, has been the best part, the best learning experience. Getting to see all these things that everyone is doing, like all these little things come together to form like a much bigger, diverse story, and to really tell like the nitty-gritty details, but also the big story in our community. But our community also reflects Florida and the United States' story overall. So it's great to see it all come together so wonderfully, and to also grow from here. That's what I think I'm looking forward to the most, is the future of this project, or just the idea behind it.
Yeah. And I will mention before our time is up that the Resilience Project has a Facebook page where we post information about all the different projects that our institutions are working on, and also some historical information about Black stories in St. Augustine. So we will post the link to that in the chat, and our time is up. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Laura and Casey. I am also looking forward to post-COVID times so we can start getting back together again every month, because that was a lot of fun. So next up, we have Jeanette Vigliotti. She has been working this semester with art professor Laura Monjovi and with students in the Flagler College Honors Program.
Hi, as Jolene said, my name is Jeanette Vigliotti, and I have two roles within Resilience, because I work for two different institutions that are participating. I serve as the Curator of Public Programming and Publications Editor for the St. Augustine Historical Society, and I'm an adjunct instructor and honors program coordinator at Flagler College. I want to just really briefly touch on some of the public programming and publications stuff that we're doing at the St. Augustine Historical Society. Recently, we published a special blog issue of the East Florida Gazette by Charles Tingley that centers the experiences of African Americans associated with what we now call the oldest house property. And we chose to publish this as a blog so this new information is accessible to the general public. And I was also able to incorporate it into my learning community with Professor Laura Monjovi, who unfortunately can't be here because she's currently teaching. So within the honors program, Professor Laura Monjovi and I have been working together. We're in a learning community, which means my introduction to literature class is paired with her visual culture class. And the culmination of our class is a panel and student-generated exhibition entitled In Conversation at the Lambia's House next Thursday. And that information right now should be visible on your screen. The theme this year for the freshman class in the honors program is communities and context. And Laura and I were committed to executing that theme in our learning community and tying it to the ongoing work of the Resilience Project. It seemed like a very natural fit. One of the ways that we could understand a community and context is by centering Black experiences in St. Augustine. Laura and I selected texts and images that raised conversations about identity, representation, historical memory. We selected texts and images that raised questions about these different thematic things. And then for 8 weeks, we took our students to visit sites in St. Augustine and reflected on how these concepts and conversations that were occurring in our texts and in those images and visual culture were actually manifesting also in our city landscape. We were able to visit a lot of participants of the Resilience Project. We went to the research library, we went to the governor's house, the Castillo, and the Lincolnville Museum. We walked the Freedom Trail. And we were really intentional that rather than just introducing St. Augustine as solely a space of Spanish colonization, that we centered Black culture and heritage as we moved through town to help students see the contributions and the enmeshment of the Black community, both past and present. So we actually started our introduction to St. Augustine on the Accord Freedom Trail. And that enabled a lot of conversations to start happening about what gets valued and what needs more attention and needs more thought and continued scholarship. Since I work at both the Society and Flagler, we were able to pull objects from our collections at the Historical Society. Students performed research at the Society's library with the help of my colleagues, Nicole, Charles, and Bob. Our students have generated historical signs for the artifacts, and they have also created creative personal responses to the historical artifacts and call attention to some of the gaps in our historical narrative, the ones that are really accessible and public. And we are hoping that this exhibit will help start telling a more complete exhibit or a more complete history of St. Augustine that accounts for the way that Black St. Augustinian experiences are present and enmeshed in those dominant narratives that we hear on the trolleys. This is one attempt, one line to show that students too can participate in uncovering and centering these marginalized narratives. On the same night of our exhibit, we are also the honors program is sponsoring a panel of speakers who will have a conversation on the ways in which they engage, interpret, and represent the diverse Black histories of Northeast Florida. And in my remaining time, I would actually like to highlight all of them. So our first panelist is James Bullock, who is a well-known St. Augustine, speaking is sometimes so hard. James Bullock is a well-known reenactor of St. Augustine history. He has used his acting skills to tell stories at various historical sites, including Fort Mose and the Humanities House. James has also performed an array of plays at local playhouses, including Of Mice and Men, To Kill a Mockingbird, A Raisin in the Sun. In addition, James has appeared in the film Journey 450 Years of the African American Experience and was featured in the PBS series Secrets of the Dead, highlighting St. Augustine history. Our second panelist is Lenny Foster. In his new Where We Stand series, award-winning photographer Lenny Foster turns his inspired and unique eye towards the history of African-American experience in St. Augustine. Using shoes positioned and photographed in places of historical significance, the photographs represent historical figures in the African-American experience, such as the Civil Rights Movement. Lenny's images and narratives shed light on an important and often neglected part of St. Augustine's African-American history. Lenny is a recipient of the St. Johns County Cultural Council grant and the Community Foundation of Northeast Florida. Our third panelist is Billy Buchanan, the ambassador of rock and soul, who keeps guests swinging and swaying through the decades from the 50s to the 80s and beyond. And our final panelist is going to be Gail Phillips, who is the director of the Lincolnville Museum and Cultural Center. She's also the next speaker. So I'm not going to say too much about the Lincolnville Museum and Gail. I will let her do that. But we felt like it was very necessary to generate this panel so we can continue to highlight other projects that are going on in our community and continue to support the work that all of these folks are doing. And many of them are participating in resilience in various capacities. So we wanted to give them a space to do that in. And that is all. And I'm happy to turn this over back to the hosts.
Thank you, Jeanette. Okay, and like Jeanette said, next up we have Regina Gail Phillips, who is the Executive Director of the Lincolnville Museum and Cultural Center.
Thank you, Jolene, and thank you, Jeanette, for including me in your panel next week as well. We're looking forward to that. I want to tell you that at the Lincolnville Museum, our mission is to preserve, promote, and perpetuate 450 plus years of African American history through education, exhibits, the arts, live performances, and oral history. And this is what we do every day. We are happy to be working with local museums and institutions who are making a concerted effort to promote their African American archives and artifacts through the Resilience Project. We hope this sharing of a comprehensive record, a comprehensive historical record of how the city of St. Augustine, St. Johns County, and Northeast Florida was established with the help of a diverse populace, including among them many people of African descent, that this will help to paint a more inclusive and equitable narrative of our history. When I began at the Lincolnville Museum, there were no systemic archives. There are no catalogs, no indexes, or ways of knowing what did or did not exist in the museum's files or artifacts, except the photos on display and overflowing stacks of books, many, many books. So what we had was a hodgepodge of stuff. Over time, I combed through every inch of this 18,000 square foot building, which is the historical Excelsior High School building. And we discovered hidden treasures of photographs, plaques, artwork, and other memorabilia that wasn't on display. We also found things with no relevance at all to the mission of the museum. One of the things I did early on was listen to everyone that had a story about the history of this area and read everything I could to help substantiate it. We continue to reach out to the community for anything and everything that they would be willing to share about African American heritage. Friends shared books, newspaper clippings, artifacts, art, other personal items from relatives, or anything that they felt was relevant to the mission of the museum. We began working with the University of Florida to collect oral histories. We worked with the University of North Florida to research data banks on veterans from the Civil War and early Reconstruction era Lincolnville residents. We work also with Flagler College with their art and history departments on a number of projects. Our archives here at the Lincolnville Museum, they're in a stage of infancy still. As we explore avenues for best practices for cataloging items physically and digitally. Much of the history, if you could go to my slide with our Lincolnville Lifeways exhibit if you want, just for background. Much of our historical data is gained through oral accounts, which we can then reach using local sources like the Historical Society and other online sources of national archives, regional archives, and ancestry records. We use many sources. We use as many sources as we can to gain access to develop the oral narratives into curated exhibits, like the one that you see pictured here that we did actually a couple of years ago called Lincolnville Lifeways. We use a variety of research to showcase the archival material that we have on hand in a broader way so that we can bring in background material and contextual history into our exhibits. Now, we just began using the Omeka site, which is one of the tools that the Resilience Project is making available to all the institutions that are involved in this project. And we're starting to use it to catalog some of the items that we have. So it's a new process for us. I'm going to tell you why it's a new process for us, and it's because the Lincolnville Museum has just reached its high mark of 3 full-time employees this year. For the first time, we have 3 people. We don't have a dedicated curator that can just work on, doing archival work or just putting together exhibits. What we do have are 3 dedicated employees and a host of dedicated volunteers and interns that we host from time to time from those institutions that I listed earlier. And we have used this partnership with the Resilience Project and local archives group. We see it as helping us to become more efficient as we grow. We're working within the museum to establish a catalog and digital storage of retrieval systems within the physical locators. And we are also working with other community members who help us to borrow some of their artifacts, scan them, and use them for part of our digital archives. One of the other programs that we're working on, I'm going to tell you how we got involved with this right quick. I see my time is running out. I must have slowed down a lot from my rehearsals, but a year ago when we got involved with this project through the Archival Society, I did a presentation, and one of the responses was, how can we really help in a meaningful way? And my response was, dig into your archives and your records and show more of the history of African Americans in this community. And we're doing just that today. Our next slide is actually of a project that we're working on using those archives, which is going to debut in June. It's called Women Who Made a Difference. And in that, we're using all of our archives, other research, and other material that we have that is going to be a digital interactive kiosk that we are working on right now. And it's going to feature 5 women who made a difference in this community over a period of time here. And it's in spite of all the odds that were against them in a time of segregated America that they were able to go ahead and make significant gains in their life work. So I thank you for the time here, and I think I used up my time. But that exhibit shall debut on June 21st here at the Lincolnville, not June 21st, I'm sorry, June 3rd, 2021 here at the Lincolnville Museum.
Okay, Gail, is that exhibit going to be both virtual and in person?
It will be a little of both. It's going to be all, well, I shouldn't say all, it will be digital. We will not have it live when we first open. It's going to be digital within the kiosk within the museum, because we want to debut that as a way of displaying our artifacts where we don't necessarily have a lot of physical space to do that. But it will also eventually be a part of the offerings through our website, like some of the other, we've done at least one other virtual exhibit. And this is going to be a prototype of some of the things we want to do in the future. We have at least 2 other digital kiosks that we plan to introduce later this fall and in the spring of 2022.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next up from the St. Augustine Historical Society, we have Chief Librarian Bob Naraki and the Digital Collections Librarian Nicole Diehm.
Good afternoon. Welcome, and thanks for this time, this opportunity. The Research Library functions as a resource for the entire community, and actually for anyone who's doing research on St. Augustine history, St. Johns County history, or early Florida history. No matter where they're located. We've had folks come in, we have a lot of visitors from the local area, but we've had folks coming in as far from Germany and New Zealand. So we truly are an international clientele. And as the library, the Society has been collecting materials since 1883. So we've been very lucky enough to acquire a great deal of material which has relevance to the general history of St. Augustine, but also to the African American experience here in St. Augustine. So let me start off real quickly with some of our secondary resources. But before that, really, I'm just the chief librarian, but I couldn't do this alone without the help of Charles Tingley, who's our senior research librarian. He's been here for close to 40 years, so he is a great corporate resource. He knows it all, and anyone who's done research in history here knows that. And Nicole Diehm, who's our who's our digital collections librarian. So we are vaguely making moves into the 21st century by having a digital collections librarian. But basically what we do is we try to make this material as available as possible. So a lot of the secondary sources of material that we have, and well, naturally we're a library, so we have a number of library books. So for example, if you're looking for historical background, you can look at Jane Lander's Black Society in Spanish Florida, Frank Marotti's books on Heaven Soldiers and Canis Sanctuary about Blacks in the antebellum period here in St. Augustine. We have family history of Blacks families. We have vertical files, which are ephemera clipping files and other material. We have biographical files on individuals, including a number of Black individuals. We have copies of church records. Charles Tingley's long work was to develop an index to the Black baptisms and other church records, Catholic church records. So it's very important. City directories, so that if you're interested in the growth of Lincolnville or where folks lived in town, you can go through that and you'll find that there's a little code so that if there's an asterisk, a black dot, or a letter C, it would identify those who are considered Black. And all of this material, including our original records, you can find guides to and other materials off our website, which is oldesthouse.org, and just click on the Research Library button. We have a large collection of original materials, and within those original materials, we have information which is related to the Black and African American experience here in town. Excuse me. One thing to remember is that material doesn't have a big flashing sign that says, "Hi, this is it." You really need to dig through it. So we have the East Florida papers, which are on loan from the National Park Service, Second Spanish period records, as well as the Patriot War papers, and they have material in there about Blacks. Census records, which identify both free Blacks and the owners of enslaved individuals. Once you identify the owners of enslaved individuals, you can take a look at our circuit court records. Oftentimes, excuse me, the estate files will list all of the slaves, the enslaved individuals, and will identify possibly their ages, their family groups, as well as their occupations. We also have the St. Augustine government records, the city papers, which go back to 1821. And those are another valuable resource. We have court records, the mayor's court, the minute books. We also have a small section which was slave passes. That is in the antebellum period of time. If a slave wanted to be out after a curfew, they needed to have a document signed by both their owner and the mayor to be allowed out after that hour. Guardian forms. For a long time, free Blacks in St. Augustine in the antebellum period of time were required to have a white guardian who would guarantee that they wouldn't cause any trouble. And this is just a very small selection of material. And there are other sources. We have floridamemory.org, which is done by the state archival records. There's a lot of good information there. Digital, which is the Florida State University's digital site, has just put up the digitized images of their parts of St. Augustine's slave passes and other material. And also the University of Florida's P.K. Young Library and the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program also have material that is relevant to this collection. So I certainly welcome you all to come down to the library. We're located at the corner of Artillery Lane and Avali's down here in town. And before Nicole shows up her nasty little 1-minute sign, allow me to just put up, so in case you're wondering, there's our building. This used to be the old public library, and that's an old postcard which also comes from our collection. So thanks very much, and we all look forward here to helping you and to serving you with your research needs. So I'll turn this back over to Jolene. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Bob. Now, is the Historical Society back open to the public as of now?
Yeah, the library is open, as is the Historical Society. The library, we have a maximum of 4 individuals, and we do ask that you make an appointment. So you can either call us or email us, and all that information is on our website.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have a video about the new permanent exhibit called I Live Here as Well at the Jimenez Vecchio House Museum. Okay. I'm not sure what's going on with the video, but I will go ahead and move ahead to the next speaker, which is Jane Mahoney. She is the Executive Director of Fort Mose Historic State Park. Here we go.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Jane Mahoney, and I am from the corporate world as an executive. And I came on, first of all, I am not the director of the Historic State Park, but of the Fort Mose Historical Society. And my role at the society is to manage operations in support of our founders and our board, who are some of them coming upon their 25th anniversary of service to the park. The role of the Fort Mose Historical Society is to serve. You could go to the next slide, thank you. The role of the Fort Mose Historical Society is to serve as a citizen support organization for the park. And the mission of the Fort Mose Historical Society is to tell the Fort Mose story. And we were, I mustn't forget to say that just this month, we were designated the CSO of the Year for historical resources for the park system. Next slide, please. So you ask about our archives, and could you go back one slide possibly? If not, there. You ask about our archives. Well, our history is buried under this island and also under a marshland area just behind Schooner's Restaurant. We had 2 forts, one built in 1738, and on the island that you're now looking at was the site of the 2nd fort built in 1752. And now to the boardwalk, please, the next chart. So when the park marks the historic site where our story, our history began. And when you come to the park, you can look out over our boardwalk and witness that. So my point here is that for 150 years or more, actually more, our story, our history, our legacy was allowed to sink into the marshland, and it was slowly lost and forgotten. No one worried too much about the story until finally, years later in the 90s, it began to be revived, or actually around the turn of the century, some activity. And then in the 90s, it began to be revived. So today, next slide, please. We tell the story in many ways. I'll give you just a 30-second recap of our story. Certainly won't do it justice, but every day I hear people saying, Fort Mose, I've never been there. What is that? So quickly, you all know, I'm sure, in history, in colonial history, there were the British colonies to the north and the Spanish colony centered in St. Augustine to the south. people who were enslaved in the British colonies to the north got a word first informally and then formally from the Spanish government saying, if you can make your way to St. Augustine and survive the journey, they weren't offered help, it was on their own that they must get there, then we will offer you sanctuary with these provisions. You must swear allegiance to the crown, the Spanish crown. You must adopt the Catholic religion, and you, for the men, you must serve a term of service in the Spanish military. And so immediately the response began. Now, people in the English plantations would leave at night, very often with just the clothing on their backs, and they would venture out over a 300+ mile journey from plantations in South Carolina, in the Carolinas, and Georgia to St. Augustine on foot, very much, and through unknown forests, and through marshland and waterways. And in doing so, two things happened. They formed the very first underground railroad, the original underground railroad, through making alliance with natives along the way. And secondly, once they arrived in St. Augustine, they founded the first free, legally sanctioned free Black community in North America and in land that's now the United States. That's the Fort Mose story. This is a picture of some of our reenactors depicting the flight to freedom from the British plantations to St. Augustine. Next slide, please. This is a little bit difficult to see, but if you look carefully, that is a dugout canoe, and that's how the first group of Africans arrived in St. Augustine. In that group, there were 8 men, 2 women, and a nursing child. Think of that. Next slide, please. So much as Gail referred to, we haven't a lot in terms of formal archives, although we're very grateful to the Resilience Project in that we will be seeking assistance in digitizing the assets that we do have. Much of what we have, we've relied on from experts such as Drs. Diehm and Landers, who did the work in authenticating the site and its history, and also the Florida Museum of Natural History, which designed our museum and its resources. Next slide, please. We do have a collection of artifacts there at the museum, and we have exhibits that are both visual and auditory and tactile for the general public to see, plus interpretive panels and other interpretive resources outside of the park. And next slide, please. Much of our, thank you, much of our storytelling, much of our telling of the story is done through living history events and exhibits. Here you see again another depiction of the Underground Railroad being formed through our annual Flight to Freedom event. And below that, you see a billboard, which went up on Monday, thanks to the Cultural Council and the Tourist Development Council. And also, I added this slide because I wanted you to see one of the major projects that we can contribute to the Resilience Project, and that is something that is being done by the Park Service through a grant from Community Foundation and Florida Power and Light. Our Freedom Trail experience is very unique, I believe, because we take for 3 days, we take small groups of people onto our Freedom Trail where they have an intimate, upfront and personal encounter with major characters of the Underground Railroad, certainly the freedom seekers themselves. A Yamasee chief who tells them about the contributions of his tribe to the journey, slave catchers and other villains, friendly friars who assisted the natives, and then eventually the visitors emerge in the first free Black community of 1738 at Fort Mose, on the very land where this took place. There's a great sense of place in this experience. And there they meet Francisco Menendez, AKA James Bullock. And Menendez was the leader of the first free community and also the captain of the militia. They see a militia muster. And then this year, for the first time, they meet the women of Mose and see the community at work in everyday life. So what usually that can only take place 3 days per year, and we get a tremendous, well, in non-COVID years, we get a tremendous volume of visitors, over 3,200 last year over a 3-day period. This year, obviously less. But the Park Service wanted to offer this intimate experience to visitors 365 days a year whenever the park was open. And so thanks to the grant that I mentioned, we are installing interpretive signage along what we call our Freedom Trail. And by invoking the QR code, visitors can see the videos of the individual interpreters on their phone or mobile device. Next slide, please. We're coming upon our 25th anniversary starting in June of this year. And so there will be a number of other special events we'll be announcing soon. And we'll be inviting everyone to. And I also wanted to show you here one of our major projects, which is, there's that sign, which is the construction of a representation, historically accurate, of the 1738 fortress. And we're in the fundraising stage now, in the final stage of architectural documents, and things are looking very hopeful. So you'll be hearing more about that. So just to close, I want to thank the Resilience Project. I think it's tremendously helpful and valuable. Our story at Mosaic doesn't exist unless we align with others. For instance, the Castillo. We are intimately connected with the Castillo story, and there's no way to separate us. I also feel that the Fort Mose story adds a very important new look at the colonial narrative. It wasn't just about oppression. The people who founded Mose showed tremendous courage and daring and perseverance and ingenuity and triumph. A very new way of looking at a story that's all too often told just as oppression. And we thank you for your help in letting us tell that story and to do so effectively. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jane. Okay, up next we have Jill Leverett, who is a park ranger at the Castillo de San Marcos National Park.
Oh, that should have a slideshow for Castillo as well with some images. But as Jolene said, my name is Jill. I'm a park ranger at Castillo de San Marcos National Monument and Fort Matanzas right here in St. Augustine. I've been with the park for about 13 years. And having been with the park as long as I have, I think sometimes I take for granted that everybody knows why the National Park Service exists and what we do, which might not be entirely the case. So I'll start with a very brief introduction of our organization as a whole, in addition to the resource itself. Next slide, please. So the Castillo is a national monument. We're under the National Park Service, just like Yellowstone or the Grand Canyon. And part of our mission is to conserve the scenery, the natural historic objects, and the wildlife within the parks, and to provide for the enjoyment of the same in such manner and by such means as will leave them unimpaired for future generations. So that is our primary mission as a National Park Service site. The Castillo itself is the oldest masonry fortification in the continental United States. The forts in San Juan, Puerto Rico are a little bit older. The Castillo is also one of only 2 forts made out of coquina in the entire world, along with Fort Matanzas, which is the other half of our park. At the Castillo, we interpret more than 450 years of cultural intersections, because although the city is quite a bit older than the fort itself, we are quite literally one of the biggest things in town. We're in the middle of town, and we have a unique opportunity to share all of the stories of St. Augustine's 455 plus years of history. And one of our interpretive themes at the Castillo is America's first great melting pot. And to quote our foundation document, the Castillo symbolizes the clash between cultures, from American Indians to European soldiers and settlers to enslaved and free Africans, that ultimately resulted in our uniquely diverse nation. So a lot of the programming and exhibits that happen at the Castillo revolve around that interpretive theme. We have some others, but that is a big one. And as far as resources for helping us tell these stories, the St. Augustine Historical Society, who we heard from a little bit ago, is invaluable. I bother Charles all the time looking for research information. We have our own archives at the Timucuan Preserve as well, a facility that encompasses Castillo, Matanzas, and Timucuan of Caroline and the Kingsley Plantation archives all in one place. Next slide, please. So the way that we tell the stories that we tell at the Castillo are many different ways. We do have permanent exhibits and waysides. For those of you not familiar with Park Service jargon, the exhibits are inside the building, waysides are outside the building. We have an exhibit panel inside the Castillo of Francisco Menendez. That's him there on the screen in the green coat, who Dr. Mahoney mentioned earlier as the captain of the Fort Mose militia. We make temporary exhibits for different times of the year, different history topic months. For example, we have a poster about the Cuban Giants, who are the baseball team in the middle there. They played games on the Castillo's grounds at one point in time. We also, for Women's History Month, have some posters up in one of our rooms, one of whom features Ana Maria de Escobar, who was the wife of Francisco Menendez. Our website also has a lot of really great resources. That's the third picture on the screen there. It's kind of a little drop-down menu that you would find on our website. We have multiple pages on African-American history and one on who actually did the physical building of the Castillo, which included both free and enslaved Africans. We also, in a perfect world with no COVID restrictions, would host special events. One of our best is a partnership event with the Fort Mose Historical Society. It's a kind of an extension of their Flight to Freedom event. We call it the Mose Story, and we talk about the journey from enslavement to freedom in Florida, the founding of Fort Mose, and the major role it played in defending St. Augustine from British attack in 1740. We also give formal and informal presentations at the Castillo, everything from the traditional ranger program you think of, where one of us gets up and talks for 20 minutes, to having a table set out with different display items and things to spark conversation with visitors. Next slide, please. We also tell our stories through the use of social media, especially over the past 13 months or so. The Castillo was closed for a while last year due to COVID. So we focused a lot on website and social media development. And there are different historical topic months that the National Park Service features and focuses on every year. We were involved with the International Underground Railroad Month, which is September. It works with the Underground Railroad Network to Freedom, which is a network within the National Park Service that links sites from all around the country that have their stories related to freedom seekers. That month also overlaps with Hispanic Heritage Month, which is mid-September to mid-October, because there is a significant population of formerly enslaved Africans in St. Augustine who became part of the Spanish community. So those two stories definitely overlap in a lot of interesting ways. We also feature in February Black History Month stories, highlighting the stories of Africans, both free and enslaved, who were part of the community here. And Women's History Month, we had the opportunity to talk about women like Ana Maria de Escobar, Sarah Ann Blocker, who's the left-hand photo in the slideshow there. She was an instructor at one of the schools here in St. Augustine, Martha B. Akins, who was our first female and first African-American superintendent at the park. That's her in the middle. And also contemporary women, people who are still around, well, Martha Akins still around, but like Maud Burroughs Jackson, who was involved in the local civil rights movement. Because even if their stories aren't directly connected to the Castillo itself, we can use our position as and our reach as one of the most visible attractions in town to tell the stories of the larger community as a whole. And we are now a member of that National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom. There was an application process we went through last year, and with the help of people like Charles Tingley at the Historical Society, historians Jane Landers and Dave Nolan, one of my colleagues at the Timucuan Preserve, Ted Johnson. Everybody put a lot of work into that, and we were accepted to the network in September. Next slide, please. Oh, okay. Yeah, I told you it was going to be dangerous letting park rangers talk too long. What's next for us? We applied to join the African American Civil Rights Network, which is another network within the National Park Service that tells the stories of the African American Civil Rights Movement. We applied last month, still waiting to hear back on that. We have some new videos featuring Park Ranger Ted Johnson from Timucuan that will be going up on our website and our YouTube channel very soon. Ted did an oral history interview with Maud Burroughs Jackson. And the more and more we look into it, the more we realize how deeply involved the Castillo's grounds were in the local civil rights movement. So we're hoping to continue working with community partners to develop more and better exhibits and waysides that help us tell that part of St. Augustine's history. One of the core values of the National Park Service is shared stewardship, which to me seems to be what this whole Resilient project is all about. And the other half of the Park Service mission that I mentioned at the beginning is that we cooperate with partners to extend the benefits of natural and cultural resource conservation around the country and around the world. So we are very grateful to have been included in the Resilience Project, and we're looking forward to working with the many amazing people in the community who can help us accomplish that mission.
Okay, thank you, Jill. Up next, we have another park ranger, Emily Palmer, and she works at the Fort Caroline National Memorial.
So I actually spend very little time at Fort Caroline. Don't ask me any Fort Caroline stories. I work predominantly, the Timucuan Preserve includes Fort Caroline and Kingsley Plantation as two of our largest historic sites. And I work mostly at Kingsley Plantation. So what is someone who works at a historic site in Jacksonville doing here at the St. Augustine Project? On a very practical note, as Jill said, we share an archivist. So our curators are the same person. So we do share that connection, and that's how we got involved initially. Now, the story of Kingsley Plantation and the Timucuan Preserve, if you want to go to the next slide, is one that is connected to St. Augustine. Kingsley Plantation was established in the 1700s, and it kind of tells the rural story of enslavement in Spanish Florida, but it is in so many ways connected to the narrative and the history of St. Augustine. St. Augustine was the center of all business, and slavery was big business in that time period. Two owners of the site were actually government officials in St. Augustine. So they would travel back and forth from Fort George Island, where we're located, down to St. Augustine. The story of Anna Kingsley, the plantation mistress who started out as an enslaved young girl, Anta Majiganjai, starts in Florida at St. Augustine. She's checked in through basically customs at St. Augustine. And so her first step on Florida soil is in St. Augustine. Many of the people who were able to self-manumit, who were able to save up every dime they could to purchase their own freedom, only possible in Spanish Florida, they would later travel to St. Augustine. There was an enormous amount of opportunity for them in the rural environment, but they could move to St. Augustine where there was that community. So although we're not located in St. Augustine, we very much are connected to that history. And many of the people who lived on Fort George Island came through or visited, or their records are stored in St. Augustine. One of the ways that we've learned a lot about the early enslaved inhabitants, the people who were here under McQueen, Don Juan McQueen, is from the diocese and their archives. So we are connected to the St. Augustine story, even if we are telling the rural side of enslavement at Kingsley Plantation. If you want to go to the next slide. The real amazing contribution, a big part of our archive that tells the story of people silenced by enslavement is through our archaeological archives. So we are considered the birthplace of African-American archaeology. Now, that's not to say that we're the first place where anyone put a shovel in the ground and found evidence of African-American history, because that happens up and down the Eastern Seaboard for years before this occurs. But Kingsley Plantation is the first place where an archaeologist asks the research question of what were their lives like, and looks to focus on the stories of enslaved people. Sadly, it took until 1968 for that to happen. But since then, we have had a rich history of archaeology that helps us to really speak to the lives of enslaved people and give them a voice and a record outside of the enslaver's narrative. So we don't have to just rely on records from people like the Gibbs and Kingsleys who owned the site, but we can learn more about their daily life. Go ahead to the next slide. One of the biggest pieces in our archives, one of the biggest discoveries was an sacrificed chicken. So the chicken burial speaks to cultural retention, and that despite being enslaved, torn from their families, people kept their spiritual life. They kept their traditions alive in a world that had stripped them of in some cases, their names, their identity is not something that can be stolen. And so this was one of our really amazing curatorial pieces, and one of the things that we use to talk about how in this community, within those semicircle of slave quarters, we can give the stories of the Yoruba and the Igbo people and the people of New Calabar and the Wolof. And so here they blended their cultures. Go ahead to the next slide. We have lots of different pieces, both archival and archaeological, that tell us a little bit more about daily life. We have partners. So a lot of these weren't found by us. They were found in St. Augustine and then preserved by some of the people we've been talking to all afternoon. Now, this is the archival bit connected directly to Kingsley Plantation, but if you want to take the slides down, we have so much more in our collection. We tell the history of enslavement, yes, but we also preserve things related to the Gullah culture, people who relocated after into the Cosmo community. We have a lot of archives related to club life. So in the Prohibition era, a bunch of social clubs popped up in our park on these isolated islands, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And those clubs were staffed predominantly by African Americans. So we've been able to collect oral histories related to those stories. And then included in our park, we have American Beach as well, which was a beach for African Americans during segregation. It is a sad time period that has a location that celebrates joy and resilience, very much so, despite it having these ropes out into the ocean that were meant to segregate people. This was a place where people came together and formed community and found a time to relax. So American Beach is included within our park, and we have collections related to that as well. We can put a lot of our collections on our website. So if you go to nps.gov/TIMU, you can see our collections. You can see interviews with descendants. So that's where we're trying to expand what we know. How are people connecting to this history even today? You can see projects where we've had youth retell the history of Kingsley Plantation. Part of our 450 plus project was to have the Jacksonville Green Team, which is a youth group, retell the story in their own way. So instead of hearing it from an archaeologist and a historian, you get to hear it from young people and how they relate to the site. So all of those resources are on our website. You see a lot of it on our social media. We're open currently. The grounds are open 9 to 5, Tuesday through Sunday. Visitor centers are closed, but our audio tour called The Lion Storyteller is available at Kingsley Plantation, named for the African proverb that until the lion learns to speak, the hunter will always have the best part. So we seek to give that voice at Kingsley Plantation to people silenced by enslavement, people whose story may not be founded in St. Augustine, but whose experience passed through or was shaped by St. Augustine. So thanks so much for including me. And I talked as fast as I possibly could because Jill is right. You can't let a park ranger drone on. We love to talk.
You did great. Thank you, Emily. Okay, so now we are going to once again try to play the video from the Jimenez Facio House Museum about their new permanent exhibit called I Live Here as Well. Okay, while we're waiting for that to load, I am going to go ahead and talk about our last panelist who was supposed to be here today, but unfortunately could not make it. Dr. James Beasley from the University of North Florida's Digital Humanities Institute wasn't able to make it today, but I would like to briefly mention his project he was supposed to talk about today. During the Civil War, Black soldiers from Florida played a significant role in the Union Army as part of the colored infantry regiments. His history students have been collecting and editing selective copies of primary documents from the U.S. National Archives and Records Administration regarding pension claims from the Civil War veterans, their widows, and other relatives. The majority of the holdings are copies of legal forms, affidavits, transcriptions for the website Florida History Online, Black Floridians and the Civil War, the 21st, 33rd, and 34th United States Colored Infantry Regiments. Florida History Online is a digital archive of textual and visual documents of Florida history produced by UNF students and faculty under the direction of Professor Emeritus of History, Dr. Daniel L. Schaefer. There will be a poster session on Zoom on April 28th at 3 p.m. The poster sessions will go live for viewing and commenting tomorrow, April 16th at english.domains.unf.edu/resilience. And now we will once again try to play the video because it's really good.
My name is Dr. Roger Smith. I'm the director of the Jimenez Facio House Museum in St. Augustine, Florida. The Jimenez Facio House is a historic home, a historic, actually business. It was a boarding house for the majority of its history. It was built in 1798. To kind of put that in perspective, Washington was still alive. So this is an old house. It's made of 100% coquina. It has an amazing history to it that maybe many other houses in town have not seen. When I first became the director, something came in and one of the staff said, "Where do you want me to put this?" And she said, "Oh, put it up on the 3rd floor." And I went, "We have a 3rd floor?"
Years ago, we had a new president. The colonial dames owned the house, and the first thing that she asked me was to start documenting the servants and the enslaved people in the house. This had never been done in a rigorous way.
So this is a history that's kind of been hidden. And our goal is really to like bring it up and give a voice to all these people who all their voices were lost and taken away.
Most of what you find is what is recorded by the other people who stayed, and they might mention how many servants they were bringing with them.
The way we organized then the exhibit was with a timeline. One side of the timeline, I tell you what's happening in the United States. And the other side of the timeline, I tell you what's happening in the house.
This is a long history of this house, and it goes through several eras. It goes through the Second Spanish period, when people of color had the varying status in societies, into the territorial period and into statehood, and then secession and Civil War and Union occupation, Reconstruction.
This exhibit, to me, now to everybody's going to mean it's a little something different, I think, but to me it means that our ancestors lived with people who they didn't treat very well.
If these walls could talk to people, how do you think they would respond to this exhibit like this?
I think they will say something like, well, finally someone is telling our story. Finally, we are not invisible anymore.
It doesn't matter if you talk to someone who's enslaved, a prisoner of war, someone in a penitentiary, someone in a horrible abusive relationship or home that they can't get out of. They never stop thinking about freedom. That's a human trait. It's innate in us. If we're not completely free, that's all we think about.
Okay. So that wraps up our presentations for today. It doesn't look like we have any questions in the Q&A box. So I would just like to go ahead. If there's no questions, I would like to go ahead and thank all our panelists for joining us today and making your resources available through the Resilience Project and for all of our viewers today. And thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in and listening to our presentations. For more access or for more information and for access to these resources, you can view the Resilience website at resilienceblackeritageinsainaugustine.wordpress.com. And I believe that's all. Thank you very much.